I stared at the screen, looking at a version of Jace I'd never seen before. The light from the video fell across his face, sharp enough that I had to blink. His voice was low, steady, and calm, like someone who was used to speaking in front of a crowd. He looked straight into the lens, tilting his head a little as if he was sharing something intimate. I like the feeling of being free. I like living alone. It makes me feel like myself. I stopped at the words living alone. Then he smiled. A wide, bright, vibrant smile. The kind of smile I had never seen in 4 years of marriage. Not the polite one I was used to, not the tight one he gave when I asked how his day was. This was a different man. A man completely at ease in his own skin, with no hesitation and no heaviness at all. I leaned back from the screen as if I'd just caught someone who didn't belong in my home. A stranger was using my husband's face to talk about freedom. And I knew that to make sense of this, I had to start from the beginning. Back then, I was still Maris, the woman who always paused for a few seconds before reacting to anything. I didn't explode, didn't demand. I observed. That was how I survived my marriage, never interrupting, never speeding things up. I believed calm could keep everything steady, and Jace once said he liked that about me. And Jace? He was the gentle-looking type. Quiet, unobtrusive, always coming home with his shoulders slightly slouched like someone who just escaped a long meeting. He wasn't the kind to cause trouble, not the kind to party, not the kind to talk much about himself. And he'd just say, "I'm tired," then fade into the silence of the apartment we shared. Our marriage moved like water in a glass, no color, no scent. So calm that sometimes I forgot to check if something was wrong. We had a grocery schedule, a cleaning schedule, a routine for visiting both families. No fights, but no special tenderness either. A marriage that didn't hurt, but didn't leave any clear shape either. But if you looked closely, the small cracks had been there for a long time. Jace was avoiding my eyes more and more when we talked. We used to look at each other in the kitchen when asking what the other wanted to eat. Now he kept his head down, or spent way too long staring into the fridge. His phone was always face down. The screen always locked, always went dark fast, like someone might be standing behind him. And every time I asked if he was okay, he repeated the same line, "I'm just tired." That answer used to make me worry. Later, it just made me feel empty. But there wasn't any concrete reason to doubt him. No strange messages, no third person, no obvious change in his habits. He just drifted in a quiet way that didn't have a name. One night, while he was in the shower, his phone rang. I didn't mean to touch it. I only wanted to silence it because it kept ringing. But one tap brought up the app he'd been using. A blue icon I'd never seen on his phone before. And right there in the middle of the screen was his profile picture. Not the one he used on his normal social accounts. This one was brighter, more confident, like it had never known the exhaustion he always told me about. I didn't dig any deeper that night. And I just kept the sharp little ache in my chest and set the phone back down. But it was enough to make me start paying attention. A week later, I opened that app for the first time. Not to look for proof of anything. I just wanted to understand why he looked so different in that picture. Simple curiosity, not jealousy. At least until the video appeared. The Jace in that video had a look in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. His voice was clear, his breathing steady, his hands natural as he talked. He said living alone made him feel lighter, freer, and more honest with himself. Not once did he mention he had a wife. Not a single sign that he shared his life with anyone. I didn't feel betrayed in the way people usually mean it. I didn't wonder whether he was messaging someone else. I just saw a man I never met. Even after sharing a home with him for 4 years, that man wasn't tired. He wasn't quiet. He wasn't avoiding anything. He wasn't fading into the apartment every night. He was bright, a kind of brightness I never knew he could create. And the moment I saw him smiling into the camera, I understood the real issue wasn't that he hid an account. It was why that version of him wasn't meant for me. I pulled a chair closer to the table and opened the second video. A decision as light as breathing, not painful, not rushed. But I knew it clearly. I was about to step into a place where the truth might not let me come back. I wasn't looking for another woman. I wasn't looking for my own mistakes. I just wanted to know who the man in those videos was, and why he lived in the light while I lived in the shadow of someone who always said he was just tired. When the video reached the end, I tilted my head and touched the screen with my fingertip, as if I were touching the face of a stranger. From that moment, I knew I had to look closer, not to find his faults, but to figure out whether the man I lived with actually existed the way I believed he did. I opened his profile and took a long, steady breath. I wasn't afraid of what I was about to see. What chilled me was the gap between the two people sharing the same name. And that was when I decided I had to know everything. The next video started playing without me touching anything. Within seconds, I noticed the first thing. Hundreds of comments from strangers. They called him genuine, trustworthy, a calm kind of energy. They said his name with a familiarity that made it sound like he talked to them often. And the Jace in this video wasn't the man who told me last night that he was tired. His voice was brighter, clearer, like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. He talked about growing up in a noisy neighborhood, about learning to be independent early, about the days he figured things out when no one understood him. Stories he had never once told me, even though I'd asked him many times about his childhood. He lifted his hands as he talked, using gestures to paint the picture, his eyes lighting up whenever he mentioned something he thought was worth living for. He had a pull to him that I couldn't deny. It was the look of someone fully at ease in a conversation, and someone who enjoyed being listened to. I sat quietly, watching him talk about the relief of not being tied down by anyone. The words slipped out of him so naturally that I had to ask myself, when did he find that voice? And why did it disappear the moment he walked through our door? The contrast between his two selves was as clear as a drawn line. At home, Jace was sluggish, answering in short phrases, drained after just a few hours. He rarely looked at me, and if I asked whether he was okay, he'd give that small shrug and say, "I'm just tired." A familiar answer I once believed without question. But online, he turned into someone else. Sharp, attentive, inspiring. He gave advice like someone who lived through everything. He talked about freedom, about living true to yourself, about the feeling of not being held back by anyone. I repeated that line in my head, not being held back, not by anyone, not even his wife. I leaned back in my chair, feeling like someone had just pulled down a curtain to reveal the real stage, not because he was trying to deceive me with someone else, but because he shared the most alive parts of himself, with the internet, with strangers, with hundreds of names I'd never heard before. And me, the person living beside him every day, only ever got the tired silences, the clipped conversations, the nods that replaced real talk. I suddenly remembered the afternoons when he asked to go out alone. "I'm going to take a walk," he'd say. "I need some air." I never thought much of it. I respected his space. But now, watching him speak so freely to hundreds of people, I understood. Those walks weren't to breathe, and they were to exist as the version of himself he preferred. With me, he switched off. With them, he lit up. The unfairness wasn't that he hid an account. It was that he gave them things he never once thought I deserved. I scrolled through the list of videos. One short clip caught my eye. Just a few seconds long, a simple title. I opened it. Jay said, "Some women think they understand you, but really they're just looking at the version they want to see." I stopped at the word women. He didn't say any names, no specifics, but the line hit like a needle to the skin. He talked about the feeling of being shaped by someone, about how he didn't want to live in a box someone else built. I didn't know if he was talking about me. I only knew I'd never tried to force him into being anyone. But that didn't make the words any lighter. I sat facing the screen, a coldness spreading from my chest down my arms. Not cold from hurt, cold from realization. He described independence as the greatest gift in his life, something he needed to breathe, to hold on to who he really was. And I understood clearly. He said all that while still sharing a home with me, sharing a kitchen, a bed, a life, a man who wanted to be seen as independent, but still left his house key on his wife's table. I didn't cry. I didn't feel betrayed in the usual way. No jealousy, no image of him texting someone else, just one simple truth. He was more himself with strangers than he ever was with me. I set my hand on the table, feeling every sound in the room fade into the background. This wasn't the sharp, sudden kind of pain. Yet it was the waking kind, the kind you feel when you finally see a truth you should have noticed much earlier. All the pieces from the past few months began fitting together. The avoiding eyes, the solo walks, the phone always face down, the exhaustion that felt performed, the silence without a reason. It wasn't that he had nothing to share. He just didn't share it with me. I turned back to the screen, watching Jace laugh in another video, a laugh full of energy. Nothing like the man who told me just last night that he just wanted to sleep. I knew I was stepping deeper into the world he'd kept for himself, but I didn't feel guilty. I wasn't digging to find mistakes. I was digging to find him, because the man in these videos felt more real than the one who'd lived beside me for 4 years. When the last video ended, I didn't blink. I just sat there, calm, as if I'd already been bracing for this. I didn't need to know which women he talked to or who messaged him. What I needed to know was who he was when he wasn't with me. And to know that, I had to go further than the videos. I had to see everything, the things he liked, the comments he left, the hours he was online, the places he spent his real time. I opened the activity log and took a breath, not because I was scared of what I'd find, but because I knew that from this point on, I would never look at him the same way again. I wanted to know who this man was, not the husband in my home, the man living a different life, right within reach, but never truly mine. With a mind as cold as the screen in front of me, I started reading line by line, and the activity log opened like a long list without a single place to breathe. Dozens of timestamps, dozens of videos recorded but not posted. I scrolled down and saw the number 37 drafts. Far too many for someone who always said, "I don't like social media." I opened the first draft. Jace was sitting in a room I didn't recognize, maybe a garage or a corner of an office. Warm yellow light fell gently across his face. He took a deep breath before speaking, like he was letting something heavy out of his chest. "I've been living the way other people expect." I sat upright at the very first sentence. "He just wants to live honestly now." Actually, user text, G, T, Ch, Mu, Dan, N, S, N, G, The, H, A, T. Translation is, "Now I just want to live honestly." Let's continue translation style. "Now I just want to live honestly." His voice didn't shake. It didn't hesitate. It was steady, like someone who had already made a decision. There was no mention of me, no wife, no relationship of any kind, but that line hit the exact place where he'd stayed silent for 4 years. I knew that tone. He wasn't talking about work. He wasn't talking about family. He was talking about our marriage, about the life he shared with me. I opened the second draft, then the third. They felt like chapters of a journal he never intended for me to read. In one clip, he talked about leaving old things behind. In another, he said, "Everyone has a version of themselves they hide." I didn't move. My heartbeat didn't speed up. There was no sharp, sudden shock. It felt like snapping together two puzzle pieces that had been lying around for years. The real twist wasn't that he hid an account. It was that he was preparing to step out of the life I thought belonged to both of us. He didn't love someone else. He loved a version of himself he never dared to be, except behind a screen. I opened the next draft video. In it, he said, "There are days I look around and feel like I'm acting in my own life." I closed my eyes for a second. 1 second was enough to understand. It wasn't that he wanted to betray me. He wanted to reinvent himself. A man he believed was more real, stronger, more deserving. And to become that person, he needed a place where he could switch off every part of who he used to be. That place was home, the apartment we shared, my presence, the person he went silent around, as if I reminded him of the version of himself he wanted to leave behind. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel disrespected, and I just saw clearly how he divided his life. The bright version for strangers, the drained, muted version for the woman he married. I opened the last video in the list. Jace looked into the lens longer than usual, as if deciding whether he should say this. Then he spoke, soft but certain. "Maybe I'm not meant for a life with someone beside me. I'd rather be alone and free than be seen through." This time, I didn't look at his face. I looked at my own reflection in the screen. There were no tears. Just one truth, sitting cleanly inside a single thought. He was afraid of me seeing who he really was, not afraid of hurting me. And that was what hurt more than any secret. I stood up. The house was quiet, as if it had never held two people. My footsteps sounded soft on the wooden floor as I walked toward the living room. Jace was there, sitting with his laptop open, thinking tonight would be like any other night. I didn't sit beside him. I stood directly in front of him and unlocked my phone. I pulled up the first video he ever posted. The sound filled the room. His voice low, confident, so unfamiliar it felt like someone else entirely. He looked up, his brow tightening. "What are you watching?" I didn't answer. I opened the second draft, then the third. He shot to his feet, eyes wide, hand reaching out as if to shut the phone off. I stepped back. Just one step, but enough to keep him from touching me. No yelling, no asking why, no acting out emotion. I looked straight at him, my voice calm enough that even I could hear the cold in it. "You're honest with everyone except the one person who lives beside you." Jace froze where he stood. I saw exactly what crossed his face. Not guilt, not shame, fear. Not fear that his secret was exposed. Fear because I had finally seen the thing he'd been avoiding, the two-sided self he never had the courage to face. I didn't need another word. I didn't ask how long he'd been doing this. I didn't ask why he thought this life was a cage. I'd already heard everything from those videos. I locked my phone, set it on the table, and turned toward the stairs. Behind me, the room went quiet again, like someone had just shut off the power to the entire house. He didn't call after me. He didn't explain. He didn't know what to say. And that, more than anything, was my answer. The air was so heavy, it felt like it pressed on my shoulders when I put my hand on the bedroom door handle. I pushed the door open and closed it with a slow, steady motion. No anger, no collapsing kind of pain. Just the quiet end of an illusion. And the rest, I'd deal with tomorrow, when I chose where I stood in the life of a man who had just said he wanted to live alone. The next morning, I walked downstairs to the kitchen like any other day. No conversation, no, "Did you sleep well?" Jay sat at the table, his hands clasped, his back straighter than usual, like someone waiting for a verdict. I poured water, took a sip, and walked past him without stopping. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I just wasn't carrying him in my thoughts anymore. He watched me, slow and tense, as if waiting for me to break the silence. but I no longer had a reason to hold the rhythm for both of us. I lived at my own pace now, slow, clear, not built around him. I grabbed my bag, locked the door, and stepped outside without asking if he wanted breakfast, without asking what he was doing today, without asking if he was okay. The small shift tilted the whole atmosphere of the house. Jace was used to me paying attention, used to my eyes tracking how he was doing. When that attention disappeared, he lost his balance. Not because he needed me, but because he needed someone to witness the version he performed every day. I came home in the afternoon and found him sitting on the couch, phone still in his hand, but the screen dark. He glanced at me quickly like he wanted to speak but couldn't. I walked past him, hung up my coat, closed the closet, and cut off every attempt he made with nothing more than quiet indifference. I started going to bed on time, eating on schedule, exercising again. I didn't look at his expressions. He didn't fill the silence with questions. When he came home late, I didn't ask. When he went out, I didn't turn my head. No more, "I'll wait to eat with you." No more, "Are you coming home early?" My silence wasn't angry. It was just empty space he didn't know how to fill. Then what I knew would happen finally did. He started to worry in a way I'd never seen before. One night while I was folding clothes, he stood in the doorway, his hand gripping the wooden frame lightly. "Maris, are you okay tonight?" I folded the last shirt and set it on the neat stack. "Okay." I didn't look at him. I didn't have to. I knew his shoulders were dropping. He was used to me sensing his emotions before he ever said a word, but now he had no one to lean on. And he wasn't prepared for the loss of the only person who ever saw his real self, even though he always avoided that gaze. The next day, as he was getting ready to go out, I called to him, my voice as even as a weather report. "Tonight, you sleep in the living room." He turned back instantly, eyes wide as if I'd said something unimaginable. "Maris, don't do that. We can talk." I shook my head lightly. I don't need to say anything else. There was no anger in my voice, no weight, just the decision of someone who had seen enough. He took one step toward me, then stopped, like he was afraid the closeness would expose something he couldn't control. "I don't want you to pull away," he said quietly, and for the first time in years, his voice didn't sound like the man in the videos or the man in the house. And it sounded like someone stripped of the role he'd been performing. I looked at him once, not soft, not harsh, just honest. "You didn't betray me. You just never chose me as the person you could be real with." He held his breath. I went on, "And I'm not staying with someone who chooses an audience over his wife." He lowered his head, his shoulders collapsing as if someone had pulled all the air out of him. He didn't argue because he knew I was right. He didn't call me emotional, didn't ask for a minute to explain. He understood that the reckoning had already happened the night I opened his phone, and from that moment on, there was no path back. I picked up my grocery bag and walked past him. His silence clung to my back like a shadow that no longer had a place to stand. That night, and the door to the living room closed behind him so softly it was almost soundless. I lay in bed alone, not crying, not shaking, not feeling abandoned. I only felt a lightness in my chest, not freedom, but the return of space that had been compressed for years. And I knew this clearly. My revenge arc wasn't about him hurting. It was about taking back the thing he never realized he was depending on. The right to be seen by me, the right to be believed by me, the right to be held in a place I no longer kept for him. When I stopped giving him that place, he no longer knew who he was. All the light he shared with strangers wasn't enough to illuminate his real self, the one that only existed when he came home and shut everything off. That night, for the first time in 4 years, my room was quiet without feeling heavy. Like I closed my eyes, and the silence didn't raise a single question about him. No memories to cling to, no words left needing answers. The next day, I packed a few simple things into a small bag. Not much, because I didn't need much. A chapter that isn't worth keeping doesn't require careful folding. I walked to the door, locked it, and placed the key on the kitchen counter, the spot where he always left his phone face down. I didn't leave a message, no note, no final words. The door closed behind me like the period at the end of a long story I didn't need to reread to understand. I moved out of the old house on a morning that wasn't special in any way. No rain, no strong sun, no sign that a chapter of my life was about to close. I just picked up the small bag I'd packed the night before and left. I didn't think about whether he was awake. I didn't need to look back. The new apartment wasn't big, but it was enough for one person. 2 windows catching a soft breeze, a small kitchen, a round table I placed near the wall. Everything neat and quiet the way I wanted. No footsteps to listen for, no door to wait on, no breath beside me from someone always saying, "I'm tired." I didn't start over right away. I didn't look for someone new. I didn't look for new joy. I just lived little by little, as if giving my body back to myself after years of someone else taking up space with silence and avoidance. On the first night in my new place, I realized this quiet was different from the quiet in my marriage. In marriage, silence had weight, always tied to the sense that something was missing, something I could never quite touch. Here, silence was just silence. It didn't carry the emotional emptiness Jace had created every time he turned away, went mute, or tucked himself into corners he never allowed me to enter. I made a simple dinner, opened the window, and realized I didn't have to monitor anyone's mood. I didn't have to guess whether he felt tired today. I didn't have to try stepping into a world he kept hidden behind a screen. 3 days later, I got the first message from Jace. "Can we talk?" I looked at the screen for a few seconds, then turned it off. No annoyance, no hesitation. I just didn't see a reason. A week later, he wrote something longer. "I think I was wrong. Can we meet and clear things up?" I set the phone on the table and kept peeling my apple. My hands didn't slow at all. Strangely, I used to imagine this moment would feel heavy. But now it was so light I barely felt anything. While I settled into my small, steady space, Jace began to show the unraveling he'd once hidden. I saw it in the numbers on his account, the place where he used to get hundreds of comments a day. The engagement was dropping. His new videos, even with the same confident tone, didn't have the same brightness. I noticed it instantly. Without the contrast between home versus online, he couldn't play both roles. There was nowhere left for him to switch off, so he couldn't switch on anymore. He posted a video about losing balance. I watched 5 seconds and scrolled past. It wasn't meant for me, and I didn't need to understand more. A few days later, he sent his final message. "I just want to know if you're okay." I didn't reply, because I was okay in a way that no longer involved him. In the quiet nights, I thought about that marriage the way someone thinks about a room that's been emptied out. No smell, no objects, no footprints. I didn't feel regret. I just saw the truth I'd spent years getting calm enough to face. The most painful part wasn't the online secret, not the videos he hid. It was that he was never the man I thought I married. I had loved a different version, one I built from the little fragments he gave me. A quiet man, reserved, introspective. But it turned out the things I thought were his nature were just the parts he shut off. And the real part, the bright part, he saved for strangers. Not because they deserved more, but because they didn't look at him long enough to see what he wanted to hide. They only saw the illusion he staged. I was the one who saw the part he feared most, his uncertainty, his instability, his need to be affirmed, realizing that made everything fall into place. He didn't deceive me. He didn't betray me. He just never showed up as himself in our marriage. And in the end, I finally said the one sentence I know he'll never forget. I didn't lose a husband. I just returned him to the version of himself he chose. A clean ending, like closing a door, It didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be clear. Now, sitting in my small apartment with the light from the window falling across the notebook I'm writing in, I understand this. Freedom doesn't come from leaving someone. It comes from seeing clearly who is standing in front of you and who was never really there. I'm telling this story not to blame anyone. Sheikar, not to revisit what I walked away from. I'm telling it so whoever listens can ask themselves something more important. Are you sure the person you love is the one they are when they're real, or just the role they perform for you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. That's the end of the story. Thank you for supporting me all this time.